Before we dive into this final episode, I want to take a moment. Not to recap exactly, but to zoom out. To ask, what have we actually learned? Over the last 2 episodes, we've been traveling through hard terrain. We've heard from young people navigating the transition out of foster care, often alone and often unsupported. We've traced the outlines of a system that too frequently fails the very people it was designed to protect. And we've sat with the numbers. 20,000 youth aging out each year, 40% becoming homeless, and nearly 1 in 4 incarcerated. It's the kind of data that makes you go still, the kind that should haunt us. This episode isn't about the haunting, it's about the hope. This is episode 3, and if you've been with us from the beginning, then you already know we're not here to tell a tidy story. We're not here for the fairy tale. We're here for the full picture, the fracture, and the flourish. So today we turn our attention to the question that's been quietly pulsing underneath every story, every statistic, and every tearful testimony so far. How do we change this? Not just how do we fix the paperwork or streamline the process or plug the holes in the bureaucracy, though those things matter. I mean, how do we actually change the outcome? It's not a program, it's not a policy, it's a person. Let me start with something that honestly still gives me chills. If you listen to our first episode, you'll remember Ella. She was the young woman who, at just 18, found herself locked out of her future because she couldn't access her own birth certificate. She needed that document to enroll in school, to apply for a job, to do anything that a legal adult is expected to do. And when the system told her no, when the adults in charge shrugged their shoulders, Ella didn't just get mad. She wrote a bill. A bill. As in actual legislation, as in if the system's broken, maybe I'll just fix it myself. I was able to catch up with Ella recently, and what she told me was this: her bill didn't just get introduced.
It passed unanimously in the legislature this session. It was signed into law, I believe, May 5th, and it takes effect July 1st.
It passed unanimously through an entire state legislature.
Thank you. Let's put the amendment on the bill. We have a motion and a second already, so all in favor of the amendment being on the bill say aye. Aye. Opposed, nays. Ayes have it. Thank you, Senator Hale. Senate Bill 1015 goes to calendar. Congratulations.
And there's more to Ella's story because with her, there's always more. More grit, more heart, more determination than seems fair to ask of someone her age. But here's the short version. A late-night writing session fueled by justified frustration has led to real change. Tennessee is now the 17th state in the country to pass a foster youth Bill of Rights. And Ella, she was there for the vote. She literally sprinted up the steps of the state capitol to make it in time. We'll delve into how this happened, what it meant, and why it matters, but I want to highlight this moment at the top of the episode. Because what Ella demonstrates is this: change doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it comes from a teenager with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. And when it does, you pay attention.
19-year-old Ella Brennan just aged out of Tennessee's foster care system, persevering through painful experiences without parents. The legislation is a Foster Youth Bill of Rights, guaranteeing foster children be made aware of their rights to school, housing, medical care, and at any time knowing they can contact an outside advocate to report anything wrong. Ella's bill passed unanimously.
Now there's a moment from Ella's story that I haven't been able to shake. After the bill passed in the Senate, I asked her what that day was like, what it felt like to watch something she had written out of sheer necessity become law. And her answer wasn't what I expected. It wasn't about pride or vindication or even relief. It was about who was sitting next to her.
You kids in the back row back there, a couple of young people back there, you ought to see what she does.
Thank you.
Great example.
I think I was emotional mostly after the vote in the Senate because I brought my 2 oldest foster siblings with me. So they got to sit on the floor with the people voting. And they were there as the Senate decided that they deserve rights. Yeah, I was incredibly emotional. I definitely cried.
2 foster siblings sitting on the floor of a legislative chamber, not as an afterthought, not as statistics, not as cases to be managed, but as witnesses to their own humanity being affirmed. Watching in real time as lawmakers said, yes, you matter. You deserve rights. That moment, it wasn't just historic, it was intimate, it was personal.
Okay, the vlog. We're here with Drea and Layla. And
she'll cry like a little baby.
I was. And the Foster Youth Bill of Rights passed unanimously in the Senate. So yay. Woo!
We have rights!
Woo!
And then, because of course it's Ella, there was this one last detail she shared, almost as a throwaway.
So it was really stressful for me, and I actually got a call that Wednesday that I had 10 minutes to get there before they voted on my bill. And so I sped over, I parked at the farmer's market, and when I tell you, I sprinted up the steps to the Capitol. I literally took a vlog while I was doing it and got to the gallery as they were voting on my bill. So I missed them describing the bill. I literally got there just in time for the vote.
Okay, so I just got a call that my bill's up in 10 minutes. And that is the legislature for you. So I'm running up Capitol Hill because, yay, Foster Youth Bill of Rights.
A 19-year-old sprinting up the marble steps of a Capitol building, breathless, probably shaking, just to catch a glimpse of the vote on her bill, the one she wrote when the world told her she didn't exist on paper. That's a movie scene. If there's a single image that captures what this series is about, that might be it. Because it's not just a story about passing a law. It's about refusing to accept that the way things are is the way things have to be. It's about voice, about agency, about how systems change when the people they failed most decide to take the mic. And Ella didn't do it alone. Community, relationship, people who showed up. That's what changed everything. Let's pause and reflect on Ella's words. She didn't attribute her success to a program or the system. She said, "I brought my siblings." And in that moment, amidst the formalities of the Senate floor, it wasn't institutional support that she highlighted. It was personal connection. The presence of her siblings symbolized the profound impact of relationships. And when we strip away the bureaucracy, the policies, the paperwork, the case files, what remains are the people who stand by us. Those who sit beside us during pivotal moments, who cheer us on as we chase change, who remind us through their unwavering presence that we are not alone. This idea that transformation occurs through relationship isn't merely sentimental. It's the core of this episode. We'll hear from mentors who remained steadfast even when circumstances were challenging. We'll explore communities that enveloped foster families with support. We'll discuss trauma-informed business practices and faith communities that embraced foster care as a mission, not a mandate. And we'll listen to young adults who, once dismissed, flourished when someone chose to believe in them. We'll confront a pervasive myth in American culture, the myth of independence. Instead, we'll consider the power of interdependence, community, chosen family, belonging. Because the truth is, no one thrives in isolation. Not you, not me, and certainly not a teenager handed a trash bag and told, "Good luck." This episode examines what transpires when someone chooses to engage, when they shift from saying, "That's not my problem," to asking, "What can I do?" Because when we broaden our perspective, when we recognize the influence of a few consistent, caring relationships, the data shifts, outcomes improve, lives transform. So let's embark on this journey. Let's meet those constructing supportive communities. Let's discover what it truly means to flourish. This is Fracture to Flourish. To understand how we begin to build the kind of community that prevents crisis before it starts, the kind that keeps young people from slipping through the cracks, we need to go to Northern California, San Jose to be specific. That's where I met Philip Pattison, a former pastor and now the executive director of an organization called Foster the City. What Philip saw, what he felt when he and his wife first became foster parents, changed everything.
So 10 years ago, my wife and I were fostering. And at the time I was pastoring a little church in San Jose, California. And our hearts were just breaking as these kids were coming in our home, kids who had been abused or neglected, experienced some kind of trauma, were separated from their families. They were coming into our home. As our hearts just broke for them, for their families, we decided, hey, what if we invite our little church to join us actually in caring for vulnerable kids? And so one Sunday morning in February of 2015, we just cast that vision to our congregation. We brought out a social worker from Santa Clara County to help us cast that vision. And then we talked for a long time about just the gospel and about, hey, this is our story. When we were in need, God brought us in, and He brought us in a family, gave us a place to heal and to have some hope for our future. And so now, we love because he first loved us, right? Like we out of that overflow, we can now move towards the vulnerable, like He moved towards us. And so the social worker sat in the back of the room and listened to that conversation and was moved, and ended up going back to the county building and just sharing with other social workers over the next few weeks, like, hey, I got to be part of this conversation. This is meaningful. So they scheduled a meeting with me a couple of weeks down the road and said, hey, that was great. They said, do you think that there are other churches that might want to do that too?
Sometimes a single question can catalyze a movement. In Philip's case, it began with a simple inquiry. What if our church helped care for vulnerable kids? This wasn't a grand strategic plan or a sweeping initiative. It was a modest proposal, rooted in compassion and a desire to make a difference. But that question didn't remain confined within the walls of his church. Word spread, and the county took notice. They saw the impact of one congregation stepping up and wondered, could this model be replicated? Could Philip help organize more churches to do the same? Philip's journey exemplifies how grassroots efforts can evolve into broader collaborations, bridging gaps between institutions and the communities that they serve.
They actually said, hey, we're in an emergency crisis right now. We've got more kids coming into foster care than we have families ready to help them. And do you think that there are churches that would want to link arms together to help us change that? The phrase they actually used was, would you guys spearhead a faith alliance?
That question launched Foster the City, a growing network of churches that recruits and supports foster families. But here's where the model gets interesting. It's not just about finding more homes. It's about keeping families in the game.
Foster the City not only helps churches raise up foster families, but we want to wrap every foster family with a team of support. So we call them support friends. Support friends provide practical, emotional, spiritual support so that families can foster longer and stronger. So they're bringing meals, they're babysitting, they're showing up on mowing a lawn. These support friends aren't just doing a task that a foster parent could do themselves. What they're doing is essentially they're creating capacity.
Creating capacity. That's the secret sauce. Because when foster families are surrounded by community, they're more likely to keep going. And when families stick around longer, more kids find stability, and fewer end up aging out without ever finding a permanent home.
So because through this kind of community support, we don't see that national, retention rate of about 40 to 50%. We see almost double that in retention because families aren't going alone. So
they aren't going alone. And that matters because every time a foster family gives up, it's a disruption for a child, a move, a loss, a step closer to aging out. But when families stay, when they're wrapped with care and encouragement, something powerful happens. Kids stay too. They're more likely to find permanency, to build bonds, to have a real shot at healing. And this kind of upstream work, the kind that prevents instability before it starts, is one of the most effective ways that we can reduce the number of youth who age out of foster care in the first place. And sometimes it leads to outcomes that no spreadsheet can measure. Philip told me a story that started with a slashed tire and ended with a celebration.
We went to go drop her off for a 2-hour visit with her mom. The rest of my family drove down the street. We went to go have dinner. Had dinner at this restaurant, came out of the restaurant, and our tires had been slashed. No idea who did it or why, still to this day. But we were like, shoot, we've got to go get this little girl. Her name was Karina. We had to go pick up Karina from this visit. And so we were like, shoot, let's go call one of our support friends. We had a support friend. Her name was Jean. And we said, Jean, is there any way you could drop what you're doing, drive down to the county building, pick up Karina from her visit with her mom? Jean said, no problem.
Jean showed up. No questions, no hesitation. And what unfolded next transcended logistics. It became a testament to the power of human connection. Jean met Karina's biological mother. They talked. Not as adversaries, but as two individuals connected by their care for the same child. Real, human connection. Eventually, Karina went home, and Jean, she kept showing up.
Jean said, hey, Tracy, you guys are kind of rebuilding now as a family. What if you guys came to our church? What if you came over to Echo Church and found a place to kind of get some support, get some love as you guys are rebuilding as a family? And Tracy said yes.
That yes became a new beginning. Not just for Karina, but for her whole family. A church community, a new circle of support. That's what can happen when we see foster care not as someone else's burden, but as our shared responsibility. Because when families don't go it alone, kids don't either. And fewer of them end up aging out, unsupported and unseen. Not every young person gets that kind of support in time. Not every foster family has a Jean. Not every child is placed in a home that lasts, and when the scaffolding falls away, when placements break down, permanency doesn't come, and the clock runs out. Too many youth age out into adulthood with no one left in their corner. And that's where people like Andre Wright come in. Andre is the founder and CEO of New Culture, a nonprofit in Phoenix, Arizona, created for youth who have already aged out, for the ones who didn't get adopted, who didn't reunify, who exited the system with a trash bag full of belongings and nowhere to go. But what makes New Culture extraordinary isn't just the housing or the resources, it's the mindset. Andre and his team are trying to flip the script, starting with a single word.
Industry-wise, we talk about how do we get these youth and move these youth toward independence. And I understand the intent behind that, but something that we've been talking about amongst our team internally is how do we get these youth to be interdependent?
Interdependent, not independent. It's a word that flips the script because independence might be a noble goal, but it's also a myth, a fantasy we love to project but rarely live out. And Andre knows that because he's lived it.
While also still living an affluent lifestyle that was be able to provide it for my mom. And so really just want to help those kids, I say kids, but those young adults be able to experience new opportunities just like I did.
At New Culture, sure, they offer transitional housing, but they also offer something harder to quantify: presence, mentorship, joy, belonging. They call it life-on-life work, being there not just as a service provider, but as a consistent presence through the messy, beautiful process of becoming an adult.
What we like to do at New Culture is really focus on those relationships. And so we never want our young adults to experience that this is just an agency who's just trying to meet our basic expectations from the state. We really want to see how do we do life-on-life work with them. And really, we think that is the change that these young adults need in order to reach their goals, is really that relationship and really focusing on the whole person.
And sometimes that means doing things that might seem extravagant or irrelevant to an outsider. Cruises to Mexico, trips to Disneyland, dinners out, the kind of experiences that many of us take for granted, but they can be absolutely transformative for a young person who's never been invited to dream.
A lot of these young adults, probably when they were in the group homes, that they weren't really afforded a lot of these opportunities to kind of explore themselves. There was really just group home, school, and maybe some minimal things here or there. But we think that exposing them to outside of their environment of Arizona and the things that they're probably associate with that gives them an opportunity to say, hey, I can do this all the time if I, work a good paying job.
Because that's what opportunity looks like when you've grown up in survival mode. Not just a job application or a rent check, but a moment of wonder, a sense of possibility, a chance to believe that the world might have something good in it for you. One young woman in the program put it best.
When she was in group homes, she felt that she was actually treated like in her words, was treated like garbage, right? In her experience. But with New Culture, she feels like she's actually treated like luxury.
Treated like luxury. Just sit with that for a second. That's not about ego. That's not about excess. That's about being seen, valued, celebrated. For many of these young adults, it's the first time in their lives anyone's made them feel that way. And that's what New Culture is really about, not just survival, but dignity. Because every human deserves to feel like they matter, like they belong, like they're worth showing up for, not just once, but over and over again. We talked about the power of community, of wrapping around foster families before youth age out. We've talked about the importance of life-on-life support after they do. But what about the bridge between the two? What about the years in between when a young person is hovering on the edge of adulthood, still technically in care but already slipping through the cracks? That's where relationships matter most. Because one of the most powerful predictors of success or struggle is not access to resources, it's access to people. Perhaps the most important factor in breaking the foster care to prison pipeline is meaningful relationships, not just programmatic touch points, consistent, trusted adults. Darren Washhausen with the Orphan Care Alliance explains the critical role of mentorship.
There's been studies done by Harvard and such that say 63% of the time a youth has a mentor or a life coach, as we call it, their trajectory will improve, by having that person versus not ever having encountered a coach.
63%. That's not a footnote. That's a life-altering variable. Because when a young person connects with just one stable adult, someone who sees them, believes in them, stays with them, their chances shift dramatically. Darren has seen this firsthand.
I'm thinking of two different individuals right now who are what I would call successful, aged out of foster care people. And when I talked with this individual, he said, there are about 4 key people who came into my life at the right time. And to those people, and they were only there for, I'll call it moments, but they were able to provide advice, insight that allowed him to change his trajectory to be who he is today.
And here's the thing. Those mentors, they weren't superheroes. They weren't therapists or social workers or saviors. They were just people who paid attention, who kept showing up.
Another one referred to when he was on his own at 13 years old and had ran away from the house because of the abuse and the families that he was placed with because of the abuse. It was the guy who picked him up and took him to a job in his pickup truck every day when he saw him walking alongside the road. It was the teacher who called him into the classroom after class, not to have a detention, but to feed him an apple and pour into him because she knew he was hungry. He remembers those people that made him the grit of who he was, gave him the resilience that he needed. People who came in, saw their need and saw the relationship, and that's the people he said made a difference in his life. He notes these people that look more like a mentor or a life coach that took the time to say, I see you and I hear you, and here's how I can help you.
This is how cycles are broken, not solely through systems, but through small, consistent acts of care. Through someone saying, I see you. Through someone asking, are you okay? These relationships do more than address immediate needs. They help people form identity, build self-worth, and envision a future. But such connections can only thrive in environments that understand trauma, environments that recognize how early wounds shape behavior, and how responses can either escalate a crisis or open a door. That's why trauma-informed care isn't just a buzzword. It's a strategy, a posture, a way of viewing the world through empathy rather than punishment. Riley Green, Senior Director at Windshape Homes, has dedicated over 3 decades to this work. He collaborates with organizations to train businesses in trauma awareness, He puts it this way.
We're creating awareness trainings around trauma for businesses. And it's already had an impact in that particular restaurant because the team leader saw something, and before they just engaged on a behavior situation, that training created that, wait a minute, this may not be any of what I'm seeing. I still need to address it, but let's sit down and talk about this.
Riley's story reveals something really important. When we understand trauma, we stop asking, what's wrong with you? And we start asking, what happened to you? That shift, simple as it sounds, can be the difference between detention and support, between pushing someone out and drawing them in, between a youth entering the criminal justice system or walking towards something better. Because again, it's not always a program that changes a life. Sometimes it's a job manager. Sometimes it's a teacher with an apple. Sometimes it's you. If mentorship can change the trajectory of a life, what happens when that relationship doesn't end? What if, instead of a program or a placement, a young person aging out of foster care had someone who said, I'm in this for life. No expiration date, no graduation requirement, just commitment. And that's the question that drives Pam Parrish. Pam is the founder and CEO of Connection Homes, an organization built around one clear, urgent idea. No one should age out of foster care without a family. But instead of trying to create new families through adoption or placement, Pam's approach is more subtle and in many ways more radical. She focuses on belonging.
Every young person needs belonging and they need self-efficacy in order to thrive. These young people, they get targeted because belonging is so critical to them. Like, it's critical to us as humans, right? So you can't get away from that desire to belong and have people who love you.
Belonging. It's a word we don't always associate with child welfare. But for a young person who's been bounced from home to home, often with no say in where they go or who stays in their life, belonging isn't just emotional, it's survival. Because when youth don't find it in healthy places, they'll look for it anywhere.
When a trafficker comes into their life to exploit them, they're looking for that belonging, so they end up in this place that I call harmful felt safety. They feel safe, but it's actually harmful and exploitative to them because the ultimate goal is to take advantage of them.
This is why Connection Homes exists, not to replace families, but to create connection, to offer youth who've aged out a mentoring family, an adult or couple who commits to being in their life for the long haul. Not adoption, not a case plan, just presence.
What we've done is we've really kind of honed in on this needing a safe, stable, supportive adult in your life. So we match them to mentoring families who make a commitment to be a part of their life for life. So we're asking people to step into these young people's lives and make a lifelong commitment that doesn't look like adoption. We have some of our youth that have been adopted, but by and large, it really just looks like being that safe, stable support system that's always going to pick up the phone, has a seat at your Thanksgiving table, a place they can come to do laundry, the voice of reason on the phone when they'd rather spend money on Xbox instead of rent. You know, all the things that young people need that you naturally get from your parents, but these young people, they don't have that in their life. So we really just focus on making sure they have those types of people surrounding them in their life.
A seat at your Thanksgiving table. Those 6 words might be the clearest expression of what these youth need. Not more programming, but belonging. Not a service, but a relationship. Not just someone to help with laundry, but someone who waits up when you're running late. Someone who notices when you're missing. Someone who stays. Because when we tell young people, you're 18 now, good luck, we're not promoting strength. We're outsourcing abandonment. Pam knows that, and she knows how dangerous that myth of independence can be.
We have this idea at 18 years old, and it doesn't matter if you're foster care or not. We have this idea at 18 years old that we can take life by the tail and we can just run with it. And pretty soon we realize we've grabbed a cat by the tail and it's going to turn around and claw us.
The difference between a young person clawed by life and a young person who learns and grows through failure often comes down to one thing: whether they have someone to call afterward, someone to say, "How'd that work out?" without judgment, someone to say, "Come home."
And it is a myth because we all need belonging. We need a community of people around us who care about us and who love us. And it's more than just people who tell us what to do or how to do things or teach us how to budget.
Because relationships aren't just emotional, they're strategic, they're economic, they're protective, they're essential. Pam says it best.
Having that interdependence, having relationships that are meaningful in our life, not only give us wisdom to help us grow as individuals, but they also give us access and opportunity that we might not otherwise have. So when you are fiercely independent and you decide to do it completely on your own, you are forfeiting these relationships that might have benefits beyond wisdom, that might have practical benefits in your life, and you're choosing to survive.
Survival isn't enough. These young people deserve more than survival. They deserve community, dignity, stability, belonging. And when we offer that, really offer it, something amazing happens. They stop surviving and they start to flourish. We've heard from Tom Baldwin before on our previous episodes. He leads strategy at the Innovation Labs at Belmont University. And earlier in this journey, he helped us start asking the right questions. Now, as we wrap up this season, we're coming back to Tom, not to introduce something new, but to ground what we've heard in story after story.
But the insight that we gain that we think is maybe the innovation opportunity was when we flipped the question and we said, but there's 20% of these youth that are somehow finding a path to, let's call it unsubsidized independence, right? They're finding a way to some level of success. And so we asked them, of those that have successfully navigated the transition, was there a common determinant or something in common? And what we started to hear really early in the conversations, which continued to manifest itself in a very strong correlation, was supportive adult relationship.
Supportive adult relationship. Singular. Not a system, not a checklist, just a person. One person who sees you. One person who sticks around.
Minimum of one, but ideally somewhere between 3 and 4.
3 to 4 relationships. That's what the data shows. And it's not a huge team. It's not an institution. It's a handful of consistent people that are willing to walk with a young person into adulthood. And the timing? Well, that matters too.
As they were coming through the system, ideally, so 16, 17, right, in terms of that age range, and then walking with them through the first formative years, at least, of the navigation or the transition to adulthood.
If you had someone when you were 16, someone who didn't walk away when you messed up, someone who kept picking up the phone when things fell apart, how different would your life be? Tom's research tells us what every mentor and foster parent and life coach has already shown us. It's not programs that change lives, it's people.
I look forward to the day when we have 0 youth aging out without support.
0 youth aging out without support. Not because we've perfected the system, but because we've humanized it. Because we've made sure that every young person, regardless of where they came from or what they've endured, has someone to walk with them toward the future. Because that's how we break the cycle. That's how we move from fracture to flourish. And that brings us back to Ella. Because if there's one person whose story captures everything we've talked about, resilience, systems, relationships, reform, it's her. Remember, Ella didn't just advocate for herself. She advocated for every foster youth who comes next. She turned a personal roadblock into public policy. She sprinted up the steps of the state capitol because she refused to accept that broken systems were her only inheritance. But here's what Ella understands, what took me this whole series to fully grasp. She didn't do it alone. Even as she sprinted up those capitol steps, she was carrying the voices of teachers who believed in her, legislators who listened to her, siblings who stood beside her. Her strength was real, but it was relational. And her vision for the future, it's one we all need to hear.
In the world that we are working towards, foster children will not have the word resilient thrust upon them. They will be entitled to a normal childhood, a normal teenagehood, and not feel like they have to constantly fight. That's the world that I want for my siblings and for all foster children across the country.
A world where foster youth don't have to earn their humanity, don't have to survive to be seen, don't have to age out into isolation. Because here's the truth. These young people aren't broken. The system is broken. They don't need to be fixed. They need to be believed in, supported, wrapped in the kind of community that every child deserves. And when we do that, when we really show up, the transformation isn't just personal, it's generational. As Pam Parrish told me,
if we are truly successful in the work that we're doing, we change a generation of young people who can change our nation. Because those who have gone through the most have the most to give back.
Those who have gone through the most have the most to give back. That is the promise. That is the potential. And it's not abstract. It's not theoretical. It's 20,000 young people every year in the United States standing on the edge of adulthood, waiting to see who will walk with them. So where does that leave us? We've spent 3 episodes exploring one of the most urgent social issues of our time. We've heard stories that broke our hearts and stories that reminded us why they still beat. We've looked at what fails and what works. But most of all, we've learned this. The solution isn't complicated. It's not perfect systems or sweeping policy reform, though those help. It's relationships. It's community. It's choosing to see these young people not as someone else's responsibility, but as our kids. Because every time we tell an 18-year-old to be independent, when none of us truly are, every time we accept that 80% failure rate is inevitable, every time we look away, we reinforce the very cycle we claim to oppose. But every time someone like Jean picks up the phone, every time a teacher offers an apple, every time a mentor shows up again and again, we change the outcome. Tom Baldwin's research says that one supportive adult relationship will change a foster kid's life and trajectory. Could you be one of them? Phillips' model shows that foster family retention doubles when communities wrap around them. Could your neighborhood, community group, or civic community do that? Andre's work reminds us that youth need dignity, not just survival. Could you create that space? Pam's insight that belonging is not a luxury, that it's foundational. Could you make room at your table? This is what Fracture to Flourish is all about. Not just bearing witness to pain, but moving toward healing together. Because foster youth are not waiting for perfect solutions. They are waiting for people. Imperfect, committed people willing to show up. The only question left is, will you show up? I'm Bryce Butler, and this has been Fracture to Flourish. Thank you for walking with us, for listening, for caring. What comes next is up to all of us. But this isn't the end of the story, because while we've spent this season focused on aging out, on what happens when support ends too soon, there's another layer we have to confront. There are people and systems waiting in that void, not to help, not to heal, but to harm. Exploiters, manipulators, traffickers, people who know exactly where to find the vulnerable. It's not rare. It's not an accident. It's what happens when we fail to show up. And it's time we told those stories too. Later this year in Season 2 of Fracture to Flourish, we'll dive into what happens after the system lets go. We'll follow the threads of exploitation across schools, shelters, detention centers, and job sites. We'll talk with survivors, with frontline advocates, with those who are building interventions where institutions fall silent. And through it all, we'll keep asking the same question. What if we refused to look away? What if we created the kind of relationships that made it impossible for young people to fall off the map? Because healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when someone stays. Fracture to Flourish is a production of Access Ventures. I'm your host, Bryce Butler. This season was created and written by Bryce Butler and Jacob Bozard. Crystal Esquivel is our producer. Bailey Pendleton is our marketing manager. Cover art and design by Justin Esquivel. Audio engineering, editing, and production by Jacob Bozard. Additional editing and production by Pat Kicklighter with Sundial Media, Crystal Esquivel, and Bailey Pendleton. Thank you for listening, sharing, and joining us in this mission. Before we close, we want to extend our deepest gratitude to those who made this season possible. To Mark, Heather, Ella, Christabella, and Gabe. Thank you for your courage and sharing your stories. Your voices have illuminated the complexities of aging out at foster care and inspire us all. Special thanks to Tom Baldwin, Mary Brownlee, Josh Yates, Kate McLean, Lance Villio, Chris Lessner, Jessica Martin, Andre Wright, Pam Parrish, Philip Pattison, Riley Green, Darren Washhausen, Jamie Cabe at the Forgotten Initiative, and Emily Richards at Show Hope. Your insights and dedication have enriched this series immeasurably. We are also profoundly grateful to our partners at Belmont Innovation Labs and Every Child Tennessee. Your commitment to fostering innovation and community support has been instrumental in bringing these stories to light. This season would not have been possible without your time, support, and unwavering commitment to the cause. If this series moved you, share it, rate it, review it, talk about it, and most of all, do something. For show notes, resources, and ways to take action, visit fracturetoflourish.com. Every young person deserves the chance not just to survive, but to flourish. And that starts with all of us.